I'd like to look at some of the basic ideas in theosophy, including today the one life in all things, and just bearing in mind that all of these ideas are presented just as ideas found in theosophical literature, and also according to the material that I understand in my own investigations. As you probably know, freedom of thought is very important in the Theosophical Society, which means every speaker is simply presenting their own understanding and whatever it is that they feel they resonate with in terms of the theories contained in the theosophical literature as well. When it comes even to a concept such as the one life in all of things, even our greatest clairvoyants are still relying on the teachings of those who are much greater than themselves, because, to be honest, no one can know the one life except for the one life itself. Consequently, there are certain ideas that we should just simply take as a hypothesis, a theory, that we can perhaps prove in subtle ways through our own experience and in our observations of the life around us. And this is one of the reasons why, because it is only a theory, why the idea of the one life in all things, even though it's an idea held by many theosophists, is not a dogma within the Theosophical Society. It's not recognized in our three objects, even though one of the other Theosophical Societies, I did notice that they had taken that idea, that dogma of the one life in all things, as one of their objects, an understanding of that. Now, this picture here is something that H.P. Blavatsky referred to, where she described manifestation as having its roots in the heavens, and all of the flowering of the branches and the leaves and the flowers in manifested life. I couldn't find an upside down tree, so I actually had to turn it upside down myself. But I think it works quite effectively. Of it, with it is a Veda knower. Veda, as I'm sure some of you already know, means knowledge. So it means a knower of the knowledge. Advaita means the end of knowledge. And just to remind us of how vast this tree is, it's always good to look at some of the images of the nebula out in space to remind us that our solar system, our planet, our solar system is just one of billions in our own particular galaxy. Our galaxy, again, one of billions within this solar system, this universe. And the universe, for all we know, is, and as Madame Blavatsky has implied, is again one of billions in other universes as well. And we have no conception of the end or even of the beginning of this vast scheme of universes and of life. So sometimes these pictures from NASA are a great reminder of just how vast life is in all of its manifestations. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard the question, what is Theosophy? HPB even wrote an article about it in the very first edition of the Theosophist. So perhaps you can tell me, what is Theosophy? I'm sure you've had friends and relatives ask you this very question. Theosophical Society, that sounds interesting. Theological Society, that sounds interesting. Theophysical Society, that sounds interesting. I've heard all of the different names when people have tried to pronounce it. But it is interesting to ask, what is Theosophy? And then what do you say? Divine wisdom, yes. And they go, that's nice. What else is it? Yeah, thank you. That's a good answer, actually. Anybody else? For truth. Very good answer too. the truth about who we really are. Yes. It's an interesting question to ask ourselves, because we will have people asking us about what is theosophy, and it is a very difficult thing to express. But in the article that HPB wrote called What is Theosophy, there was quite a longish article, but there was no definition of theosophy necessarily contained in that article. But what she did allude to was the importance of having an inspiration of one's own. And I think that's a nice way to sum up theosophy. It's not something that can be found in any other tradition, even though she also says that it is the basis, the foundation of every spiritual philosophy and religious tradition on this planet, down through the ages. She describes it in the sense of an inspiration as something that comes from within and is not derived from outside of ourselves, meaning it's not simply derived from a book, even though we may benefit from the teachings contained within books. It's all right. So I think that is probably the most important aspect of theosophy. It does mean divine wisdom, but at the same time it's not found alone in books. It is found within ourselves. It is only when we discover theosophy within ourselves that we can then say that we have come to theosophy. People could say that they agree with theosophy, but unless they have their own inspiration, which actually is a kind of an uplifting inspiration, an enlightening inspiration, unless they have that, they haven't really found theosophy. The other thing that she spoke about is she said that it is divine wisdom, because that's the translation from the ancient Greek. But she also said esoterically they tended to regard the translation in the sense of reversing the two words. So it is no longer just divine wisdom, but it is also the wisdom of the gods. And that means that it is the wisdom of life and the wisdom of experience. And when we say divine wisdom, we're not talking about just earthly wisdom, not just practical wisdom, physical wisdom, emotional wisdom, or intellectual wisdom. We're talking about something that is a divine and spiritual wisdom. And on this topic, it was Plutarch who said that spiritual wisdom is not about any particular fact or information. It is about all knowledge, and more importantly, it's about the use of knowledge, not knowledge itself. So that's another important thing. The other aspect to what is theosophy is what is it that helps us to progress through life. If somebody gives us food, for example, that can help us for an afternoon because we feed our stomachs, gives us a certain amount of energy. Perhaps if somebody gives us another kind of intellectual idea, it might even be some practical knowledge that can help us through life. But there is also a higher knowledge that can help us through many, many incarnations and change the whole future direction of all of our incarnations. And it is that knowledge that becomes the most important knowledge in discussing what is theosophy. And in particular, the knowledge that can help to lead us to the spiritual path. People often say, well, let's have some theosophy practical. And that's a very good thing to do, to find a practical wisdom, a practical morality for everyday life. But we also need to look at what is practical in the long term as well, not just in the short term. What is practical from life to life to life. And one of those things that is very practical is a much clearer understanding of the unity of life. CWL mentioned that in the world today, certainly at the time he wrote, and I think still today, he said there are many people who have very high ideas in terms of metaphysics and the understanding of philosophy. But he said they don't necessarily reach the same levels as a theosophist, and when they do, it's not as clear because the thought about it is not as clear. He also mentioned that in terms of accuracy, scientific thought is much clearer than often much metaphysical thought. But again, he said the philosophical thought on these things, because of the material that's been presented in the last 150 years, actually helps us to give us a greater clarity in our thinking as well. So we have an opportunity in the study of the theosophical literature to actually create thought forms and to reach, if you like, the heights of thinking through having much clearer conceptions of metaphysical topics. Now, the first thing that I usually do when people talk about what is theosophy, apart from mentioning that it is an inner inspiration and not just simply derived from outside sources, is I also talk about the three great truths. And I'm sure many of you have come across this. It was printed in Light on the Path and also the Idyll or Idol of the White Lotus. And in that book, it said, regard the three truths. They are equal. These written above are the first of the rules which are written on the walls of the Hall of Learning, which is also mentioned in the Voice of the Silence. Those that ask shall have. Those that desire to read shall read. Those that desire to learn shall learn. And then the Light on the Path goes on and it says, there are three truths which are absolute and cannot be lost, but yet may remain silent for lack of speech. The first of these is the soul of man is immortal, and its future is the future of a thing whose growth and splendour has no limits. It's good to think about these three truths. When we talk about the soul of man, we don't really know the origin of the etymology of the word soul. It is sometimes a translation of similar words in other languages, such as pneuma in the Greek, which differentiated between spirit and matter as pneuma and anima, hence the expression anima mundi, the soul of the world. We may have ruah, which is the Hebrew word, and again these symbolize breath, just as the Latin spiritus also symbolizes breath. The breath of life that is invisible, intangible, and yet at the same time is something that we cannot live without. It is an essential part of life. And when we look at the word man, we're not necessarily looking at simply a gender, because again, as I'm sure many of you know, the word manus comes from the Sanskrit word, man comes from the Sanskrit word manus, which means thinker. So it is man, the thinker, that is referred to here. And that aspect of that is the immortal self. And it's said that it is the future, or is the future of a thing whose growth and splendour has no limit. But these are also relative terms, as often found in many of the ancient spiritual texts. We tend to think in our modern scientific mindset, we tend to look for nouns that explain things and objects that are static. And yet so often all of these terms are very much relative terms in the ancient scriptures. So the soul that we're talking about, and the word soul has no clear origin in its etymology, but it's suspected to come from a word that means the sea. So it seems to come from something that represents a kind of an infinitude of matter. And yet the soul of man is immortal is not the soul that remains static in that sense. In fact, one could say that we have two souls. A mortal soul, that of our mind and emotions, which in the theosophical literature is kama manus, desire mind. The two so strongly linked together that, like Pavlov's dog, as soon as a bell is rung, we start to get hungry. When we see the food, we're half expecting to hear the bell as well. So it is the soul of man that is the immortal self, which is, from our perspective, buddhi manus, which is separate to the idea of kama manus. These are two aspects of the soul, that which is immortal and that which is mortal. The immortal aspect, if you like, is symbolized by the chariot of Plato, being pulled across the sky by two horses, one white, one black. The white horse symbolizing buddhi manus, that which represents both purity and also the reflection of all colour outwards, away from itself. the other horse being pulled towards the earth, the white horse being pulled towards the sun, the black horse being pulled towards the earth, the black symbolizing the absorption of all colour and of all light. So we have this idea of a soul of man being immortal that is not the mortal self. But there are allegories in all the various ancient traditions in which there is the unity of the immortal and the mortal, symbolized by the astrological sign Gemini and the Greek myth of Pollux and Castor. And it has no future because just as there is our own immortal soul, likewise there is a soul life or something that ensouls that very nature as well. And constantly, as further we go inwards, we find that there is always a deeper aspect to soul. So it becomes very much a relative term, not an exact term in that sense. What we're looking at today is the principle which gives life, dwells in us and without us, is undying and eternally beneficent, is not heard or seen or smelt, but is perceived by the man who desires perception. So it tells us that it's possible to know Theosophy, the face of the divine, face to face. It's possible to reach that divinity ourselves. And in fact, the nature of the Theosophical teachings is that every single person, in fact, every life is a God in the making, a God in the becoming. In the same way, when we have our Theosophical meetings, we have meetings of lodges and branches, national meetings and conventions, this convention here, we can't really do anything to make or create a Theosophist. All we can do is wait for people who have already made themselves to come and see us, because through the teachings we have in Theosophy, there is an opportunity to continue the journey that was begun in a past life. All of those who belong to mystery schools in past lives, to the ancient mysteries in Greece and in Egypt, to various ashrams in India and so on. There's a chance to reconnecting with these teachings, and again feeling, as so many people have often said, as if they have come home to something. There is that familiarity. Even Annie Besant felt that the Secret Doctrine, which was her introduction to Theosophy, which is a very difficult way to start, even she felt that in the first reading she felt as if she had come home to something that was within her. She said she still had to go back and read it and contemplate it intellectually, but still there was that familiarity that she found from the very first page. I have to say I found that familiarity from the very first page as well. Couldn't stop for a few months. And of course the last great truth, each man is his own absolute lawgiver, the dispenser of glory or gloom to himself, the decreer of his life, his reward, his punishment. In other words, there are no accidents. Everything that comes to us is of our own hand and our own making. If anything, we should only pity the poor messenger who's brought that pain and suffering back to us. These three principles are the three most important principles in the Theosophical teachings, and these three ideas are certainly the ones that best expresses the fundamental question of what is Theosophy. If you add to it the suggestion of HPB that it is also an inspiration, a divine inspiration, if you like, that we can only find for ourselves within. Now, it's said that one doesn't necessarily have to believe or take these three truths even as theories in order to be a great person, to be a kind person, to be a philanthropic person. One can certainly progress a great deal on the spiritual path without necessarily believing any of these three ideas. But at the same time, if we really want to accelerate the progress, then it is much better if we actually have an idea about what it is we're accelerating to. If we don't know where we're going, then it makes the whole path very difficult to tread. And in fact, it is the first step as given in all the great spiritual traditions. In the little book at the feet of the Master, the very first chapter is discrimination, being able to discriminate between the true and the false, the real and the unreal, between an idea that will lead us away from the spiritual path and an idea that will help us to finally tread the spiritual path. And as it said in the Light on the Path, to become that path itself. which is all part of the progress. Even the Buddha had a similar idea, because the very first step on the Noble Eightfold Path is right philosophy, right belief, right understanding. It has a number of different ideas. And it's only through that right understanding that one can actually progress to the next step, which is right thought, right speech, right action, right means of livelihood, and then right devotion or energy, right concentration or meditation, and the last, right contemplation. Again, the last three being the same as the 3 steps in the 8 limbs of yoga. So again, we see that we can only really progress if we have a much better understanding of the unity of life, that there is progress and unlimited progress in the becoming as a God for every form of life, and that the mirror that helps us to grow and develop is karma. Karma that brings our own experiences back to us so that we can learn from first-hand experience how we have treated others. And it's through these 3 aspects that we grow and progress. Now this is Thales, the sage of Miletus, was once asked 9 questions by a sophist. And he was one of the teachers of Pythagoras. And I'm sure some of you understand, in the theosophical literature it said that Pythagoras was an earlier incarnation of the master KH, who was one of the inner founders of the society. It was KH and M who gave the instructions to H.P. Blavatsky and spoke about her future work when they met at the Great Exhibition in 1851 in London. And that was her role, was to form the Theosophical Society. And there's a little book called The Original Program of the Theosophical Society, which explains what instructions she was actually given by the masters, what the society should be and what it should not be. And that's definitely worth reading for anyone if they haven't read it before. So Thales was asked, what is the oldest of all things? And the answer is God, or the divine, if you like, because he has always existed. And what divine? What has neither beginning nor end? Anything that has a beginning has an end. Anything that is finite is not truly divine. What is the most beautiful of all things? The universe, because it is the work of God. In Hinduism, they call that Leela, play, the play of the Logos in forming the manifestation of life. And it is not work, it is, if you like, an artistic expression. It is a joy to create life in all the manifested universes. Hence, it is also the most beautiful of all things. What is the greatest of things? Space, because it contains all that is being created. But it's not the space that we normally think of as outer space. In fact, that's only one small aspect of all of the energies that surround us, all of the subtle forces, even the nature of atomic structure itself. The greatest of all things is space, but it is akasha, which is a different thing altogether. It is the space or the container of the solar system, the space or the container, if you like, of a galaxy and of a universe, ever greater spaces or akashic containers. Akasha is very interesting. It is space, but at the same time, it is also both the container of all forms, the container of all potential forms in manifestation, and it is also that upon which the Lipika that HPB speaks about in The Secret Doctrine, that in which they record all of the impressions of manifested life, every thought, every action, physical, emotional, intellectual, even at the Buddhic level and higher. Every impulse is recorded into the Akashic records. Yet it is the same Akasha that is the magnetism that contains not just the past, but also the present and the future as well. And in containing all forms, it contains the potential for all future manifestation. because it is out of the forms in the Akasha that the builders and the Lipika draw their plans for the future development of manifested life. And this manifested life is not too dissimilar to the idea of a play, if you like, where you have the beginning of a play, you have the middle of the play, the drama, the changing and alteration of the characters, the journey, and finally you reach the end of the play. And yet this play is told again and again and again, just like a performance of a play in the theatre. But each night it's different, it's not the same as it was before. And there are certain milestones that have to be reached during that play, but still we know the beginning, we know the middle, we know the end. And it can be played in different ways in each night. So there's still an opportunity both for evolution and growth in this process, and yet also for creativity as well in this process. What is the most constant of all things? Hope. Because it still remains with man after he has lost everything else. Even Beethoven had hope. He had suffered a great deal in his life, and yet the one great love that he had was his music, his ability to compose these beautiful melodies. And yet even that was lost to him when he started to become deaf. And so he poured all of his hope into his last great symphony, the Ninth Symphony, which is called Ode to Joy, one that he could never even hear once it was complete. But this hope is also a much greater hope. It is the hope of a very deep philosophy that understands there is progression through all the manifested life, through the human kingdom, and progressing into the spiritual and divine kingdom. It is the expectation, if we look at hope, which is truly an expectation of the unfolding of life that always progresses forward towards the greater, towards the improvement of life. And we all have our personal hopes, but they are also expectations, sometimes based on fantasy, sometimes based on the idea that we might be favoured by a god or something else. But these are kind of temporary hopes. These are not the true philosophical hopes, the true philosophical expectations. The only true hopes are those which are immortal, the immortal hopes. He also said, what is the best of all things? Freedom, because without it, there is nothing good. We tend to equate freedom with will, free will. And yet we know that truly the only true will is that of the manifested Logos. It has both the greatest will and the greatest freedom. All we really have is a fragment of that will that we call free will. And as we work through life and grow and develop, and as karma creates limitations against which actually become challenges for us to overcome, then we are, if you like, applying our free will, but also reducing the application of our free will in our failures by creating that karma as well. The free will is an opportunity for growth. In the karmic limitations, our free will is diminished. By working according to the law of karma, according to the law of evolution, our free will expands. So what we call the free will, that fragment of the divine will, can grow or it can become diminished as we progress through life. The more we live according to the divine laws, the more we can discover those laws for ourselves, then the more likely we can actually unfold a greater willpower within ourselves through our own limited will, our own fragments of the divine will. What is the quickest of all things? Thought, because in less than a minute it can fly to the ends of the universe. Of course, human thought probably takes a little bit longer than that, but certainly divine thought can easily flow to the ends of the universes. They don't really say what kind of thought, but truly divine thought can reach the end of the universe. In the solar system, our human thought can certainly reach the end of the solar system. Our thoughts, as it's taught in Theosophy, are things, a manifested form. The energy of the thought is produced by our willpower. The intensity of our thinking actually creates the strength within the thought. Poor thinking creates a very limited and short-lived thought form. The nature of the thought is created by what we are thinking, whether it's of a car or an abstraction, such as the nature of orangeness, for example. And that becomes, in the lower mental plane, a geometrical form, and a combination of geometrical forms is that. And if we think of somebody, that becomes a thought form that actually goes to the person, either with malice in some cases, or with love and affection, if we're thinking about them positively. And it's been said many times that most of us have benefited from the thought forms sent by mothers in particular. Not all mothers, unfortunately, but most mothers that send constant love and affection to their children, whether through prayers, whether through contemplation and thought, or whether just having a quiet moment of concern. That becomes a real power and protection in everyone's lives. What is the strongest of all things? Necessity, which makes men face all the dangers of life. Why necessity?
It takes us to the brink.
Sorry?
It takes you to the brink. Basically, unless you meet it, it takes you to the brink and pushes you where other things might not.
Yes, necessity pushes us. Necessity is the mother of invention, as has been said. But necessity is more than that. In English, it actually means that which cannot be otherwise. Now, we tend to think of necessity as being a choice, but it's interesting when you look at the meaning in that sense. That which cannot be otherwise. In other words, it's an enforced thing. And of course, in the Greek philosophy, necessity was represented by a god. The god of necessity was Ananke, A-N-K-E, which means necessity. And it is that god which is the collector of dues, the god of karma, if you like. It is also the god that is the mother, interestingly that it's a feminine god or goddess, the mother of the three fates, past, present and future, is necessity or karma. So if you take it from that perspective, it is karma which makes men face all the dangers of life, that which cannot be otherwise. That doesn't mean that karma is necessarily completely fixed or that we should take a fatalistic view of life. We can't necessarily change the energy that we've already set in motion in a past life, but we can do a great deal towards modifying how we receive that energy, to be prepared for that energy by developing a moral and a pure character. We can certainly do a great deal towards being understanding, not to react to that energy, to create more karma that then affects others. So we can do a great deal. And it's been said that karma is a little bit like a ship, that, I think it was Annie Besant who explained that, with its sails set out, and it's a matter, you can't necessarily stop the wind, but you can change the tack of the sails to change the direction of the boat. So it's possible to actually work and veer with the karma. In other words, working consciously and positively with the laws of nature, not violating those laws in order to work with the karma that has come to us. What is the easiest of all things? To give advice. What is the most difficult of all things? To know thyself, or if you like, to know thy higher self, to know our personality, which simply means mask, our physical body, our emotions, our mind, the abstract mind, the nature of our wisdom mind, and of course our higher self. To know all of these things progressively is extremely difficult. I'll just go through these next ones quickly. What is the wisest of all things? Time is the wisest, for it discovers everything. He said that death is no different from life. Someone asked him, then why don't you die? Because death is no different. When someone asked him whether a man can escape the notice of the gods if he does wrong, he replied, not even if he thinks of doing wrong. An adulterer asked him if he should swear that he had not committed adultery. He replied, perjury is no worse than adultery. Expect from your children the same provision you made from your parents, for your parents. How can we live best and most justly if we do not ourselves do the things we blame others for doing? I do think that's the very best approach to take towards karma. Not to think about who has done this and to lay blame onto somebody else, but to ask ourselves, have I done this to somebody else? Have I caused pain and suffering in exactly the same way? In fact, it's always good to constantly ask ourselves questions of all sorts of things. People sometimes say that it's better to ask questions than to have the answers. I'm not too sure I quite agree with that, but certainly internally I completely agree with it. It's much better to continually ask ourselves questions. What is my motivation for doing this thing? What am I seeking? Why am I reacting in this way? Why is this person coming to me with this particular thing? What should I do? Is this the right thing? And ask, if we feel that something is not quite right, just allow some time to pass and then ask again, is this really the right thing to do? And then after a little while, we'll find that we'll just know what is the right thing to do. I'm just going to touch now on the secret doctrine teachings taken from the proem. How many people have read the proem to the secret doctrine? Oh, a few brave people. If you read the proem, the best thing is don't read it as a novel. Just simply read the proem slowly, absorb as much as you can, and then go back and just read it again. In fact, I would suggest reading it 3 or 4 times, and then just absorbing it as best you can. I have to say there is something very mantric about the secret doctrine and its writings. Not necessarily all of the quotes that she uses, but certainly much of her writing has a very powerful mantric effect. You can read another book that is a description of the secret doctrine, and it can be very helpful to gain some of the ideas. But there's something very powerful that comes off the pages when you read that text, such as, it is the one life, eternal, invisible, yet omnipresent, without beginning or end, yet periodical in its regular manifestations, between which periods reigns the dark mystery of non-being. Unconscious, yet absolute consciousness. Unrealizable, yet the one self-existing reality. Truly a chaos to the sense, a cosmos to the reason. It challenges us. I should say she uses the term absolute quite a lot in the secret doctrine. She refers to the one life in all things as the absolute. In the Western esoteric tradition, they tend to refer to the manifested life as the absolute. But that is a poor choice of words for something that is in a period of separation, in a period of division. The word absolute means unrestricted, free from limitation, complete, perfect, free from imperfection. There is nothing in the universe free from perfection in manifested life. Only the absolute is perfect. We have limited perfection, the perfection of the human being in becoming an adept, the perfection of the animal in becoming a human, the perfection of the plant in becoming an animal, and the perfection of a mineral in becoming a plant. These are, if you like, smaller perfections, but the true perfection of life is not in the manifested, it is in the unmanifest. HPB said there are two ones, that which is the one unmanifest and that which is the one manifested life. Not relative to something else, to set free. So it's important to, and one thing I did find with HPB, people sometimes say that she didn't really have a logical way of thinking in how she constructed her books, and occasionally some people helped her. There may be some truth to that, but when it comes to the use of words, she was extraordinarily exact. I've always found that her terminology and the words that she has chosen, either in English or other languages, are the most apt words that could ever be chosen to describe these particular concepts. That's my experience anyway. She says it's one absolute attribute in which there's no separation, which is itself eternal, ceaseless motion, is called in esoteric parlance the great breath, which is the perpetual motion of the universe in the sense of limitless, ever-present space, or akasha. That which is motionless cannot be divine, but then there is nothing in fact and reality absolutely motionless within the universal soul. We know that there is nothing purely motionless even in this room. This room may have a table that gives the appearance of being motionless, but we know the atoms in the table, the molecules, are in constant motion. There is nothing that is truly static, only something that gives the appearance of being motionless. And he says, and this is very interesting because this applies to the very name Theosophical Society and Theosophy. Plato proves himself an initiate when saying in Cratylus that theos is derived from the verb thein, to move, to run, as the first astronomers who observed the motions of the heavenly bodies called the planets theoi, the gods. He also produced another word, aletheia, the breath of God. Sometimes that's been a person's name I've found as well. And it's interesting that this idea of the breath of God is used because nearly all of the words that describe the spiritual, whether it's pneuma or spiritus, all are symbolized by the idea of breath, the sacred breath. This is from Socrates, where he says, "My notion would be something of this sort. I suspect that the sun, moon, earth, stars, and heaven, which are still the gods of many barbarians, were the only gods known to the Aboriginal Hellenes. Seeing that they are always moving and running, from their running nature they were called gods or runners. Hence our idea of theosophy, divine runners." From the beginning of man's inheritance, from the first appearance of the architects of the globe he lives on, the unrevealed deity was recognized and considered under its own philosophical aspect, universal motion, the thrill of the creative breath in nature. Occultism sums up the one existence thus: deity is an arcane, living or moving fire, and the eternal witnesses to this unseen presence are light, heat, moisture. Of course, in the idea of the egg of the Hiranyagarbha and the cosmic egg found in so many different traditions, that which helps to provide evolution and growth within the egg is heat and moisture, and that which provides the life is a ray of the divine that is symbolized by light. So the egg, or the germ of life, if you like, is another way to put it. So the egg symbolizes the germ or light, heat or spirit, and moisture or matter. This trinity including and being the cause of every phenomena in nature. Intracosmic motion is eternal and ceaseless. Cosmic motion, the visible or that which is subject to perception, is finite and periodical. As an eternal abstraction, it is the ever-present. As a manifestation, it is finite both in the coming direction and the opposite, the two being the alpha and omega of successive reconstructions. Cosmos, the noumenon, the spiritual, has naught to do with the causal relations of the phenomenal world. And we have the same idea in the Bhagavad Gita, the idea of the Logos being the observer, the witness, to all that unfolds as a result of the properties of matter. It is only with reference to the intracosmic soul, the ideal cosmos in the immutable divine thought, that we may say it never had a beginning nor will it have an end. With regard to its body or cosmic organization, though it cannot be said that it had a first or will ever have a last construction, yet at each new Manvantara, its organization may be regarded as the first and the last of its kind, as it evolutes every time on a higher plane. Upon inaugurating an active period, says the secret doctrine, an expansion of this divine essence from without inwardly and from within outwardly. From without inwardly is for the nature of the universe, which is, if you like, a very rare manifestation given the length of time, since in the secret doctrine she speaks only about the manifestation of a solar system. But the universal manifestation is from without inwardly. For that of the solar system, for that even of our own causal body in manifesting the personality, it is from within outwards. Occurs in obedience to eternal and immutable or changeless law, and the phenomenal or visible universe is the ultimate result of the long chain of cosmical forces thus progressively set in motion. In like manner, when the passive condition is resumed, a contraction of the divine essence takes place, and the previous work of creation is gradually and progressively undone. Interesting that she looks at these two fundamental propositions, expansion and contraction. The forces that are centripetal and the forces that are centrifugal as well. The forces that draw towards the center, which is contraction, and the forces that push towards expansion. These are the two universal forces of spirit and matter. And the nature of the entire universe is built around these two opposing forces. The visible universe becomes disintegrated, its material dispersed, and darkness, solitary and alone, broods once more over the face of the deep. To use a metaphor from the secret books which convey the idea still more clearly, an outbreathing of the unknown essence produces the world, and an inhalation causes it to disappear. This process has been going on from all eternity, and our present universe is but one of an infinite series which had no beginning and will have no end. And she says, if the Parabrahma of the Hindus may be taken as a representative of the hidden and nameless deities of other nations, this absolute principle will be found to be the prototype from which all the others were copied. Parabrahma is not God, because it is not a God. That's a very important point. It is not God because it is not a God. It is not the manifested divinity. It is the inseparable absolute. Parabrahma meaning simply, of course, beyond Brahma. It is that which is supreme and not supreme, explains the Mundukya Upanishad. It is supreme as cause, not supreme as effect. In other words, it is not supreme in manifestation. In one sense, there is no difference between this being the divine parent into which life manifests and even earthly parents as well. The fact that there is a sacrifice of life in the caring and raising of children. It is supreme as unmanifest, but not supreme in manifestation. It is a secondless reality, the all-inclusive cosmos, or rather the infinite cosmic space in the highest spiritual sense. Brahma Nuta being the unchanging, pure, free, undecaying supreme root, the one true existence, Paramathika, and the absolute Chit, or consciousness and intelligence, Chaitanya and consciousness cannot be a cognizer, for that can have no subject of cognition. In fact, there is no object and subject. There is no will. There is no love. There is no separation. There is no union and joining. There is no other aspect except eternal, ceaseless motion. But we would also say life, the one life. We don't want to make it seem as if it's something akin to a mechanistic world. It is, in fact, all life. Can the flame be called the essence of fire? This essence is the life and light of the universe. The visible fire and flame are destruction, death, and evil. Fire and flame destroy the body of an arhat. Their essence makes him immortal. I love that saying. Fire destroys the body, but the essence of fire makes him immortal. Then she gives us 3 fundamental propositions, and I'm just going to look only at the first one. And this is one of those that even George Arundel said was extremely mantric in the construction of the words. An omnipresent, eternal, boundless, and immutable principle, on which all speculation is impossible, since it transcends the power of human conception and could only be dwarfed by any human expression or similitude. It is beyond the range and reach of thought, in the words of Mundukya, unthinkable and unspeakable. The rootless root of all that was, is, or ever shall be. It is, of course, devoid of all attributes and is essentially without any relation to manifested finite being. It is beingness rather than being, in Sanskrit sat, and it is beyond all thought or speculation. So why are we thinking about it? Here, Mike? Beyond all thought and speculation, unthinkable and unspeakable. So why are we thinking about it?
I think it's very paradox because we cannot understand it, but also we cannot stop thinking about it.
Yes.
Also because we cannot directly jump to what is being said there, but it has to be step by step. So first we think, then we go for higher thoughts, and then eventually
So you say we take separate steps.
yeah.
So we enlarge our conceptions as we go. Yes, I'd agree with that. There was an image that Jeffrey Hodgson had in some of his books, which was an angelic figure with a finger pointing upwards, and it had beneath it a little motto that said, "Aim to the highest." And I think that's the nature of why we do conceptualize these things. It's to progress to the next level of conception, as you were saying. And it is also to reach towards the highest, because in reaching towards the highest, we attain, a little bit like the tide. We reach up towards the sand, and whatever point we reach, we leave a mark. The water retreats. We reach up again along the sand and go a little further next time, and we leave a mark, and the water retreats. So it's expanding ourselves. It's moving towards that which is eternal, ceaseless motion. This beingness is symbolized in the secret doctrine under 2 aspects. On the one hand, absolute abstract space, representing bare subjectivity, the one thing which no human mind can either exclude from any conception or conceive of by itself. In other words, we can't escape the thought of space. We close our eyes and we're still conscious of this idea of space, even within the blackness. We look around us and there is just space all around. So it's impossible to have a thought that doesn't include the idea of space. And yet at the same time, we can't conceive of it unless it's in a relationship with something else. If we look at the clear blue sky, it's impossible to judge how far away the sky is, what it's actually produced of. All we know is that it is blue. But if we see a plane flying across the sky and we have an idea of the size of a jumbo jet, but then we have an idea about how high the plane is in the sky, and an idea of what might be in front of the plane, and an idea of what might be behind the plane. But we can only think of space in terms of relationships, not space by itself. And yet it is the basis of all manifested life, the basis of all spatial activity. On the other absolute abstract concept, absolute abstract motion, representing unconditioned consciousness, because there is no object of which to be conscious of. There is no subject and object, hence unconditioned consciousness. So these two aspects are the two attributes of the absolute. Absolute abstract motion is the basis of consciousness, also the basis of time as well, since time and consciousness are really two aspects of the same thing. Consciousness is inconceivable to us apart from change, and motion best symbolises change, its essential characteristic. This latter aspect of the one reality is also symbolised by the term the great breath. Again, this idea of breath, which is also important in the process of manifestation. Thus then, the first fundamental axiom of the secret doctrine is this metaphysical one absolute, beingness, symbolised by finite intelligence as the theological Trinity. It is the causeless cause. The first presupposes necessarily something which is the first brought forth, the first in time, space and rank, and therefore finite and conditioned. The first cannot be the absolute because it is a manifestation. Therefore, Eastern occultism calls the abstract all the causeless one cause, the rootless root, and limits the first cause to the logos, in the sense that Plato gives to this term. It is interesting that the first manifestation of divine will, if you like to think of it in that sense, is, if you like, still a manifestation, and it is a first, but it is not the absolute. And yet at the same time, it is hidden because the second and third logos, the second and third courses are visible. Hence the idea in Christianity, for example, that for those to come to the Father, they must go through the Son. In order to perceive the first logos, one must first of all pass through the second logos. Or Avalokiteshvara, for example, which is often translated as the Lord who looks down from on high by the Orientalists. But in the Mahatma letters, they point out that that's not its real meaning. Its real meaning is the I'm just trying to, just have a moment. Sorry, its meaning is the Lord who is seen. Now that may seem like the Lord who looks down on high, but that also implies the Lord that is unseen that lies behind it. So consequently it's referred to as the Lord who is seen, not the Lord who looks down from on high. Spirit or consciousness and matter are, however, to be regarded not as independent realities, but as the two facets or aspects of the absolute Parabrahm. And of course, in other traditions, it might be referred to as the Ein Sof. Now, Ein Sof is the highest in the Kabbalah, that which is the unmanifest. It means no thing. Now, sometimes you may see that it's translated as infinity, and yet the Ein means that it is limitless, not something that perhaps has a beginning and yet supposedly no end. So it is much deeper than just infinity alone. It is no thing in the sense of no manifested thing. Another description is in the Tao of being the great extreme. What can be great, what can be extreme? No particular object, no thing. It is also described in Buddhism through the symbolism of Amitabha. Now that is a god in the West in Buddhism, yet at the same time the very word means boundless. How can you have a word pointing in one direction that means boundless? It's, as HBB said, it has come to have a more anthropomorphic meaning over time. But at the same time, if one considers that the awakening of the Logos in the East in manifested life and the sleeping of the Logos, the leaving of manifestation in the West, coming into pralaya as being a symbolic direction, then yes, one could say that in the West is Amitabha, the boundless. Considering the metaphysical triad as the root from which proceeds all manifestation, the great breath assumes the character of pre-cosmic ideation. It is the fons e origo, I did have to look that one up, source and origin of force and of all fundamental consciousness, and supplies the guiding intelligence in the vast scheme of cosmic evolution. On the one hand, pre-cosmic root substance, Mula Prakriti, the root matter in which this manifestation occurs, is that aspect of the Absolute which underlies all the objective planes of nature. In fact, every single atom within the cosmos is the Absolute enclosed, if you like, in Mula Prakriti. There is not an atom that is not enclosed in Mula Prakriti. Hence, T. Subbaro, in his notes on the Bhagavad Gita, said that it is impossible to perceive the Logos except through the veil of Mula Prakriti. It becomes that which conceals the Absolute. Just as pre-cosmic ideation is the root of all individual consciousness, so pre-cosmic substance is the substratum of matter in the various grades of its differentiation. And this is an extremely important point, even in the practice of meditation, because when we look at the nature of life, life in all the planes has its vehicle of consciousness, and it has the consciousness that is contained within the vehicle. The consciousness within the vehicle is an aspect of the Absolute. The vehicle itself is an aspect of Mula Prakriti. Consequently, in our meditations, whether we're meditating on the form of a master, whether we're meditating on a particular thought, a seed thought, the most important thing is to not reach in meditation to the form side of life, but to reach towards the consciousness that is within the form side of life. And it is only by reaching that consciousness that we become united or merged, and not merged with Mula Prakriti, which is always enclosed in the form side of life. It is the body, whether we call it the physical body, the etheric double, the astral body, the mental body, the higher ego, the causal body, that which generates causes by coming into each incarnation. The Buddhic vehicle, these are all vehicles of consciousness. It is that which is the consciousness within that we have to merge with in the progress in meditation. Interesting that Mula Prakriti is, if you like, the matter in which the cosmic egg of the universe forms. As I mentioned, it is the Absolute enclosed even in its smallest speck by Mula Prakriti. And yet, as we learn in the Bhagavad Gita, having manifested even only a fragment of itself, still it remains. The manifested life remains, even apart from its manifestation into Mula Prakriti. This ultimate root matter is seen at our level, this is from C.W. Leadbeater in Textbook of Theosophy, in what scientists call the ether of space. They no longer call it that, but never mind, it's still a good title. This has been described in occult chemistry under the name of koilon, or bubbles of koilon. To every physical sense, the space occupied by it appears empty, yet in reality this ether is far denser than anything of which we conceive. And it's said that its density, this is Mula Prakriti, is defined by Professor Osborne Reynolds, who lived in the 19th century and died in the early 20th century, as being 10,000 times greater than that of water, and its mean pressure as 750,000 tons to the square inch. Now it is the force of the Logos that actually manifests within Mula Prakriti, and if you like, pushes back all of that unmanifest life that we refer to as the great matrix, the mother of the universe, in that which the absolute merges. We don't know what Mula Prakriti is. All we know is that it has three qualities spoken of in the Bhagavad Gita, which is rajas, or activity, sattva, or rhythm and harmony, and tamas, immovability. And each of these three qualities are reflected in the trinities of all the great traditions. So tamas, or immovability, is that aspect of matter that's reflected in the will or the power of the Logos, the Father in Christianity, Osiris in the Egyptian tradition, Shiva, and so on. These are all the power aspects that is the opposite to immovability of matter. In Sattva, we have the correlation in the spiritual to the sun aspect, Horus in the Egyptian tradition, Vishnu, and so on. That aspect that represents love and compassion. That aspect which represents the unity of form. And of course, we have rajas, activity, and its opposite is the intelligent aspect, the divine mind, the third logos of various trinities. Now, you'll find in the Secret Doctrine the HPB never gives the true occult figures for anything, knowing that people might be able to take those figures and make calculations for themselves and unearth secrets that are meant only for those who have been initiated. So consequently, when she talks about the age of the planet, she gives figures that are close but not exact, such as the use of the Brahmanical figures to show that the Earth is currently 2 billion years old, whereas science would say that it was 4 billion years old. Now, considering that Hinduism in those days was saying the universe was 2 billion, was much better than the theologians in England saying that it was only 6,000 years old. Now, so in this case, CWL decided to use something from science that gives an approximate figure, but not the exact figure. And I looked up Professor Osborne Reynolds and found out that his expertise was in the flow of water. And in fact, his training materials and his books are still in publication today because he created mathematically accurate renditions of the flow of water that are still being studied. But his suggestion here about ether or Mula Prakriti is from the Submechanics of the Universe, which he published in 1903. I think that would probably have some very interesting things, but life is short. And of course, this egg of life is produced in Mula Prakriti, and this is a picture of the cosmic egg, which I borrowed from the Wikipedia. So if you simply do a search for the cosmic egg, you can find that motif in all sorts of different traditions, including at Easter time in the Christian tradition. The Matsya Purana gives an account of initial creation. After a Mahaprayalaya, in other words, a great period of rest, the great dissolution of the universe, there was darkness everywhere. Everything was in a state of sleep. There was nothing, either moving or static. Then Svayambhu, self-manifested being, arose, which is a form beyond senses. It created the primordial waters first and established the seed of creation into it. The seed turned into a golden womb, Hiranyagarbha. Then Svayambhu entered into that egg. The Narayana Shukta exclaims that everything that is, visible or invisible, all this is pervaded by Narayana within and without. And of course, as mentioned before, the three common attributes of light, heat, and moisture, the germ, spirit, and matter in the manifestation of the universe. Spirit or consciousness and matter are, however, to be regarded not as independent realities, but as the two facets or aspects of the Absolute. Parabrahm, which constitutes the basis of conditioned being, whether subjective or objective. Incidentally, before we go on, I just wanted to make it a little bit clear something we were talking about the other day, that in the nature of our understanding that comes from, say, the Christian tradition, it's very easy to think of spirit and matter as being two separate things. But in fact, it is svabhavat, that which is self-becoming, the one substance in nature which is both spirit and matter. It is, as HPB pointed out, concretized spirit or ethereal matter, the one substance in different conditions. And in that sense, it was interesting to look at the Bhagavad Gita, where we often think of the Hindu words as Purusha and Prakriti, that which is spirit and matter. And yet in the Bhagavad Gita, it says that there are different types of Purusha. There are different types of spirits. Just as in some informal aspects of Christianity, we might talk about the spirits or the ghosts and so on. And they say in Discourse 10, referring to that which is the absolute, thou art the supreme eternal, the supreme abode, the supreme purity, eternal divine man, Purusha or spirit, primeval deity, unborn, the Lord. And it's interesting that Annie Besant, in this translation, translated Purusha as man, divine man. In other words, it is life as well, the divine thinker. So this is the eternal supreme Purusha. But also in the Bhagavad Gita, we learn that the Absolute is seated in the hearts of all, and from me, memory and wisdom and their absence, and that which is to be known in all the Vedas am I, and I indeed the Veda knower and the author of the Vedanta. There are two energies, Purushas, in this world, the destructible or temporary and the indestructible. The destructible spirit and the indestructible spirit. The destructible is all beings, the unchanging is called the indestructible. The highest energy, Purusha, is verily another, declared as the Supreme Self, he who pervading all sustaineth the three worlds, the indestructible Lords. So from our perspective, the physical body represents matter, prakriti, but our astral bodies, the consciousness within it, represents our Purusha. Its body is to it also prakriti. And consequently further we have this relative state. The deeper we go, we find that what is a vehicle, a form of prakriti in one state a form of consciousness in one state is simply a vehicle, and a higher consciousness exists in a higher state. And we find this progressively as we go deeper and deeper into the different states of consciousness. And yet it is only the one substance we progress into, one universal substance in different grades. And yet these grades of matter and spirit are all around us. This is the physical world, but the astral is also here as well. Likewise, the mental atoms are all around us. Even nirvana, that which all is extinguished, all of a personal nature is extinguished, is all around us, even as we speak. The atoms much further apart, much smaller, and yet still all around us. And we are completely unaware of that nirvanic state. And that's why sometimes people may say that one can reach nirvana now, because we're already in it, just completely unaware of it. But there is one thing that allows the divine, Purusha, to influence Prakriti, and that is Fohat, the spiritual energy. It is the bridge by which the witness may influence the matter, the vehicle, on every plane in nature. It is the Shakti powers. The bridge existing in the divine thought are impressed on cosmic substance as the laws of nature. Fohat is thus the dynamic energy of cosmic ideation, or regarded from the other side, it is the intelligent medium, the guiding power of all manifestation, the thought divine transmitted and made manifest through the Dhyan Choans, or lords of meditation, the architects of the visible world. Fohat is not only the Shakti powers, but it is the energy that allows consciousness to influence matter on all the planes of nature. Thus, from spirit or cosmic ideation comes our consciousness. From cosmic substance, the several vehicles in which that consciousness is individualized and attains to self or reflective consciousness. While Thohat in its various manifestations is the mysterious link between mind and matter, the animating principle electrifying every atom into life. And that's something I'll talk the Shakti powers just very briefly tomorrow. So we have, for a clearer idea, the absolutes, the Parabrahma, the Vedantins, or the one reality. Sat, which is, as Hegel says, both absolute being and non-being. Next we have the first manifestation, the impersonal and in philosophy unmanifested logos, the precursor of the manifested. This is the first cause, the unconscious of European pantheists. We then have spirit matter, life, the spirit of the universe, the Purusha and Prakriti, or the second logos. And we have cosmic ideation, Mahat, or intelligence, the universal world soul, the cosmic noumenon, or spirit of matter, the basis of the intelligent operations in and of nature, also called Mahabuddhi. The one reality, its dual aspects in the conditioned universe, and yet the one life. So I'm just going to stop here and get you to break into groups and to discuss something. So I'd like you to form groups of 5, if possible, where that 5 is a good enough group where everybody can possibly have a say in the group. 10 is far too much, even though it's the perfect number. So into groups of 5. And what I want you to do is to look at our symbols, and these are 2 representations. And I want to get you to answer 3 questions. And you can nominate a speaker in the group, or you can each speak, whatever you find easiest. And the 3 questions are: what is the meaning of the symbol? What is the practical use of the symbol in everyday life? And what is the meaning of the motto? Now this would be simple if I got it up on the screen. So that were the 2 symbols I was trying to show you before, just 2 representations of the same thing. What is the meaning of the symbol? What is the practical use of the symbol in everyday life? What is the meaning of the motto?